Hello, this is Dr. Rand again for the Human Freedom Project. As always, it's good to be with you. It's been a pleasure to do this work, and this is God's work, and I want you to get the most out of it. Please listen to the content, because there's a lot of content that God has shown me over the years that I've used in practice, and it works. So he has released me to do this, and so here I go. Last week, we did a couple of the more simpler strongholds, and if you want to go back to that and look at that and then look at what we're going to do today, that would probably be a good idea. But I'm not in the business of control. I'm in the business of giving out information, and you can do with it what you want. I pray that God would bless you as you seek Him and keep seeking Him and keep going after Him with all your heart and soul and mind, because that's what He asks you to do. And again, in all things in life, you have a choice. So it's your choice to follow Him. It's your choice to follow the enemy. And I pray that you would make the right choice. All right, today what I want to do is I'm going to show you a couple strongholds from the host of a person that was born into the occult. And we're not going to talk too much about that right now, but when you're born into the occult, you're dedicated to Satan in the womb. And so you don't have a really good start. Or many times a child is given to alternate parents after they are born, and they dedicate them, and they help them to make it through life in a negative way, obviously, in an occultic way. And so when that happens, they take a child from their parents, and there's curses placed on the child to make them feel like the parents are hateful people. And so they separate them. It's always both sides against the middle when it comes to the demonic and to the occultic. Any devil worshiper has multiple personalities, every last one of them that I've ever worked with, and God told me that everyone does. And that's the only way they can do their work. So this particular person was married for a number of years. And it was always a difficult time. When you look at a couple, let's say the husband has 10 parts, and in the case of multiple personality, she had 45 parts. So if you take 45 times 10, that's 450 possible interactions you could have at any given time. Most of the time, there's only going to be a few options. But there's all those options that are available. That's why it's very hard for a multiple personality to ever be married and to ever have a decent marriage. Now there's 4 levels to becoming a witch. That's level 3, there's ritual, level 8, level 12, 18, 24, and 30, and I may be off a year or two on all those. But there's 6 levels to become a full witch. And in each of these levels, there's rituals performed, and they're ugly rituals, very painful rituals. But those rituals, as the person lays on the altar, they are sexually abused, and they are also, as they lay there, they're chanted to all around, and the people walk backwards. It's really crazy that they do that, because they think that by going backwards, they can go back into time and stall the end. And they even speak backwards, so you wouldn't understand what they were saying. But anytime you're in a ritual like that, you are possessed in some part of you. Some people, obviously, in those cases are totally possessed. Some people are not totally possessed. If somewhere along the line they have accepted Christ, they can't be totally possessed. But they can be there, but kind of be outside looking in, because their body is taken over at that time by the enemy. So what happened in this woman's case is she made it to the 4th level. And she was a Christian. In fact, she was very much involved in our church. And yet, that was first level. That was the boardroom. When it gets down to the sixth level, the occult level, when you're at a ritual, of course, that was when she was a child then, but later on also. But by the way, she was adopted by a very rich person that was in the occult. And so that became her cult parents. So Satan always works both ways or both sides against the middle. So he opposes your human parents, your bloodline parents, with a new set of parents in the occult. And so you have to love the one and hate the other, and that's the way they make it. So it's a constant hassle in the person's mind. And there are some parts of them that are attached to the one set of parents, and there's some parts that are attached to the other. So as we talk about this, that's the background of which these strongholds are. And this was on the host of the woman, and she had lived all her life with her, all her married life with her husband, who was a professional. And I'm not going to say what kind. But it's interesting. I worked with her, and I worked with her to the point that she was free enough to make a decision to leave him. I was not happy with that, but I can't control what happens with this. Most of the time, people finish the process, and they are different people. And she was for a time, and then she just twisted. One part of her took over. And that's the problem with multiple personalities. There's so many potential problems that could happen. So let me just give you these these two strongholds. I hope we can get through them today. And let me show you what kind of things were on her that caused her to be so far away from God when she had been so close. So let's look at the first one. Got to get over to the side here a little bit. All right. All right. So the first one, on the very deepest level, the level that is not known by the person. It's the disappointment on the one side and lack of self-control on the other. So if you look at shame in the middle, the person has lack of self-control. So when they do something that they wish they hadn't done, they're going to feel shame. And that shame says to them, I am no good. I'm not a good person. But that has been placed in a person in the occult. That's been placed in them since birth. They should feel guilty. They should feel shame. They should feel low self-worth. They should be condemning themselves. And that's what the rituals do over and over and over. And then they're accentuated by these strongholds. So disappointment on the other side says, I'm disappointed with my life. I'm disappointed with who I am. I'm disappointed with my marriage. And I want to do something about it. So the shame, I'm not a good person. And the disappointment is saying, well, this has been a lousy marriage anyway. It's all my husband's fault. Blah, blah, blah. And that's what I kept hearing from her also. I really, based on my previous experience with other clients, I didn't think that she would ever give up the marriage. But obviously this was pretty strong. And God allowed it. He allowed her to leave. So you take disappointment and shame on that repressed level, and you see bitterness. She's disappointed in the marriage. She's feeling low and not respected and all these other words that she would use. And then she became bitter over a period of time, and bitterness just builds over the years. As long as you don't do anything, and as long as you don't remove these curses, you will remain bitter. And then on the other side, the lack of self-control says, I need to do something about this, and I'm entitled. I'm entitled to do whatever I please, whenever I please, however I please. And, it's the who, what, why, when, where, and how questions. All of them are saying, because I feel so bad about myself, it's my husband's fault. I feel bitter over it. And because I don't have any self-control in this case, and Satan is putting this on her to accentuate what she feels already, she feels entitled. There are so many people out there that they're not necessarily in the occult, but a lot of this fits with other people that aren't in the occult. They feel entitled to do this, to do that, because they've been ripped off, so to speak. So the bitterness on the one side goes from disappointment to bitterness to resentment, and that seems to follow quite well. Resentment is on and on and on, resenting the other person. So you get to the point where if you had any kind of love, it's dissipated to a great extent. And that's exactly what Satan wants to do. On the other side, the lack of self-control leads to an entitlement. And if she doesn't feel like she's getting what she's entitled to, she's going to be resentful. And that's exactly what happened also. So this is Satan's will for her life, and he won out in this case. So the resentment is the head of the emotions. That's the conscious level. She's always resentful, and she will act according to her resentment. And so the next thing is the will. And in the will, she would go out into these rants, and she would rage. And she would rage and be angry to the extent that it was uncontrollable to even hang in there and listen to it. But her husband did stick with it. He didn't leave her. He could have, but he didn't. But what this leads to is both sides against the middle. The shame is so strong that it eventually leads her to wanting to get a divorce. And Satan puts at the top. Of course, when Satan came in, he brought death. And he brought, including that, is death to a marriage. And that happened. She got a divorce. Let's look at the second one. These are not anywhere near as deep as when we get on the second to the sixth level. And we'll show those at a different time. But this is still the host in the boardroom. So let's look at the second one. This one is just total fear. And that's exactly what happened. She was blackmailed by the occult. And that's the way I would say it. She was blackmailed. Blackmailed in the sense that they put so much negativity in her mind, she can't see positive. And that's how bad it gets in the occult. That sometimes gets that bad without being in the occult. But this is the ultimate. Look at this one. Fear of being alone on the right side. And that's a very common fear for a lot of people. That fear of alone. And what is fear? Fear is basically being afraid of something that you don't even see, that you don't know. It's usually unwarranted. An actual fear is being afraid of fire, for instance, when you touch the stove. You pull your hand back. That's legitimate fear. But these fears that are on this stronghold, Satan is nothing. And because of that, the fears are nothing, but he makes the people feel that they are something. I guess that's a simple way to say it. All right, so the fear of being alone, nobody wants to be alone. But in the occult, you are made to be alone. You have no help. You have to follow Satan. You have to do everything. You're in slavery to Satan, period. So you are alone because you are not allowed to have friends. You can have friends on the first level, but you will have no friends on the sixth level. Then we look on the other side, the fear of being unwanted. Now, based on what I told you earlier, would that not be a legitimate fear based on being removed from her parents and given to somebody else? And then they continually tell her that she's a nobody and she doesn't mean anything to them. It's a traditional programming breaking down a person to the point where they can fill you up with their junk. And that's what the enemy does. You don't have to be in the occult to do this. And there are people out there that do, but there's a lot of people that have strongholds and of fear that aren't in the occult. So the fear of generational strongholds on my children. So this is what she was afraid of, and we prayed against that, is that she was afraid that she was going to do the same thing to her own children. It ended up that she didn't because God stopped her. God would not allow it to happen. And so it did not happen. And the kids are doing fine. But her fear of generational strongholds is legitimate because these strongholds in the occult, it goes from generation to generation to generation. And I'm saying it's probably gone way, way back that they have been in the occult. In the Dark Ages, there was a lot of demonism and a lot of worshiping Satan in the churches, especially the Catholic Church. And the people were in fear all the time. That was a really dark time, but it's a really dark time with individuals when this fear overcomes them. So the fear of being alone and the fear of generational strongholds on my children, that's pretty fearful, because this whole thing is about fearful or being fearful. So the next step is fear of having nothing. So if I'm alone and I have all these strongholds on me, there's no hope for me. There's not a chance for me in the world. And so I'm afraid I'll never have nothing. So in the previous stronghold, it was about breaking down the marriage. Well, by breaking down the marriage and separating and then divorcing, she was able to get half of what her husband had earned. And she now has something. And so that's one of the reasons why that happened. It's one of the, probably the minor reason, but on the other side is the fear of being unwanted and the fear of generational strongholds on my children. So the fear of loss is saying, I'll never be wanted and I may lose my children. I may lose other things. So instead of really dealing with the situation after we dealt with the strongholds and they were removed, she made sure from her fears that she went ahead and lost because her kids distanced themselves from her. She thought she had a winning proposition, but it didn't work. So the fear of having nothing and the fear of loss leads to the fear of nothingness. So if I've lost everything and I have nothing, I am nothing. But that's a fear. It's not a legitimate fear. And then in the will, it's escape from fear. So what she does to get out of the marriage is she escapes from that fear. It's so strong. So then on the mind, it becomes a catatonic fear that is just constantly obsessing her mind, and she can't get rid of it. So we removed all of these, and she was doing pretty well at the time, but then we got to the second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth levels, and there was such deep strongholds and spirits with a much higher level of content that they overcame her, and she gave in to this. At the time that we did these strongholds on the host, she was doing all right, but that was just the first level. And so as we talk about all this, we are concerned about everyone, but we are concerned about these people that have been overcome by the enemy over the years. And it's just so sad, and it's heart-wrenching to see these people. Their mindset has been so skewed by Satan through these rituals that he has totally controlled their mind to a great extent. And he just leads them into something that is not going to be helpful to them. In fact, it's very derogatory. It holds them back. It makes them make choices that are wrong. And the ordinary person can do that, but the person in the occult, they have to have a lot of help. or they will not get out of the occult. So I showed you these two, and then next time we're going to talk a little bit more about strongholds, and then we will move on to other things. So just remember this: if the Son gives you freedom, you will be free indeed. So God bless you, and goodbye.